Interesting updates from this area as well. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. And the Russians managed to improve their, let's say, positions along the line of combat contact, especially in the area of the settlement by the name of Konstantinovka. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to secure the settlement of Stupachki, which is located to the south of the city of Chasiv Yar. We haven't adjusted the map. This territory was colored in Russian favor a long time ago based on the report that was published by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, but today and these days we got reports both from neutral mappers and from pro Russian resources. Especially we got videos where we can see how Russians were moving in this area. So this is another confirmation of complete control over this territory and most likely of destabilization in this area. Now most likely the Russians are moving further in the southwestern direction. According to geolocations and updates, currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Pritiechina. The Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over this territory, trying to destroy as many as possible Ukrainian vehicles and positions, reinforcements and reserves that Ukrainians are sending in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But the Russians controlled the situation. Ukrainians suffered huge losses, and most likely during the next several days we might get first geolocations and first let's say videos exactly from this area. Currently the main Russian purpose is to take under control this territory. If the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, this is already going to be the beginning of the battle for the southeastern part of the city of Konstantinovka itself, because the distance between possible Russian positions in this area and the city of Konstantinovka itself would be less than 3 kilometers. But this control is not the most important thing. The Russians need to answer and to secure the village of Pritiechina, because first of all they need to establish complete fire control over the road that goes between the city of Konstantinovka itself and the southeastern part of the Konstantinovka pocket. Because if you take a look at this map, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours the biggest numbers of updates are coming exactly in this area. The Russians establish complete control over this territory. The Russians destroy every single vehicle or every single position they managed to discover, and during the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions once again exactly in the southeastern part. The Russians secured the central part of the northern Ligne, and maybe tomorrow or the day after, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation.
En tout cas, quand on voit ça, ça fait quand même beaucoup de zones à contrôler par les drones. Et surtout, vous voyez que dans l'attaque, on ne voit pas de soldats russes. Une fois de plus encore, pour tuer le mythe que, soi-disant, les Russes ont des pertes inconsidérables. Ils n'ont aucune pitié, aucune considération pour leurs soldats. Vous voyez que les zones qu'ils nécessitent un contrôle, en tout cas une préparation très minutieuse. En tout cas, les Russes prennent le temps de bien nettoyer la zone avant d'envoyer leurs soldats. Et donc, s'il y a bien des gens qui sont en déroute et qui ont des pertes, c'est les Ukrainiens. Parce que à chaque fois qu'ils doivent prendre le contrôle d'une zone, et vous voyez qu'ils vont prendre les zones ukrainiennes toujours à revers. Ici, là, ils sont au-dessus des zones par lesquelles les Ukrainiens vont rentrer, parce qu'il y a encore des Ukrainiens dans ces poches. Donc, le scénario, je ne sais pas qu'est-ce que Zelensky il pense pouvoir encore obtenir, et surtout que maintenant, les Américains, vu tout ce qu'ils sont en train de mettre en Israël, même les... J'ai vu une information comme quoi même les gens du Pentagone commencent à s'inquiéter, parce qu'ils pensaient que Israël allait faire une démonstration de force très rapide par rapport aux Iraniens, et surtout que les Iraniens ne seraient pas en mesure de faire les choses qu'ils ont fait. Les Iraniens résistent déjà mieux que ce qu'ils pensaient, mais avec l'aide qu'on vient de voir que les Iraniens vont avoir, il faudra encore plus d'argent, plus d'armement pour les Israéliens pour essayer de lutter contre les Iraniens. Puisqu'on le voit, il y a même eu des défaillances de leur système. Et souvenez-vous, quand on avait dit que le dôme de fer avait causé le truc dans le Golan, là, dans le Golan où il y avait des Syriens, ils avaient dit non, c'est les Syriens qui avaient tiré. Nous avons vu de nos propres yeux le système de dôme de fer, là, le missile qui part en l'air et qui retombe, comme les gens l'avaient témoigné à l'époque où c'était arrivé et où on a mis ça sur le dos des Syriens. On l'a vu clairement pendant ce truc. Et là encore, les médias occidentaux, il ne faut même pas le rapprochement. Ils n'ont rien vu. Et donc, ça demande beaucoup plus d'argent, beaucoup plus d'armement, beaucoup plus de missiles de protection anti-aérien qu'ils n'ont pas, qui sortent des stocks américains. Les stocks américains qui sont de plus en plus difficiles à remettre en place. Et surtout que maintenant, les Chinois veulent peser sur le truc. Donc, eux aussi, ils vont réduire ce qu'ils fournissent aux Américains en matière pour qu'ils puissent faire ou reconstruire ces missiles ou produire ces missiles. Et donc, même s'ils ne le disent pas à bas bruit, le bruit passe déjà que voilà, à ce rythme-là, parce qu'on a vu que les Israéliens, ils tirent même dans le vide. Hein. Ils n'arrivent pas à intercepter concrètement tous les missiles balistiques que les Iraniens tirent. La dernière fois, ils ont montré, ils ont dit, les Iraniens, ils ont tiré un truc et les dégâts, c'était catastrophique. Et en compensation, quand les Iraniens ils tirent une petite salve de 10 ou 20, vous voyez tous les missiles qui partent du côté israélien. Ça coûte énormément d'argent. Et plus que l'argent, il faut renouveler tous ces missiles. Ils vont les renouveler comment? Et donc, les Américains... Ceux qui comptent, ceux qui font les chiffres, ils sentent déjà que c'est cuit. Alors, pour les Ukrainiens, qu'on a oublié, à qui on ne fournit plus rien, eux, comment est-ce qu'ils vont tenir?
Of this territory. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal and to get as close as possible to the settlement of Belagora by taking under control additional trenches and fortifications exactly in this area. So the Russians are moving, trying to improve their positions, and during the next several days, most likely the battle for Belagora itself is going to begin. This will allow the Russians to get as close as possible and to create something like semi-encirclement of those Ukrainians who are currently located in this pocket, because there are also lots of Ukrainian forces exactly in this area, especially in the area of this forage, which was turned into a huge fortified area a long time ago. So the Russians will try to tighten the noose around these positions and at the end to force the Ukrainians to fall back. The Russians need this offensive operation because they need both control over these villages and over this pocket, and especially the Russians need control over the territories of the settlement of Nilipovka, Plishevka, and these territories. The Russians are tasked to establish control over this territory also in the very near future. And when talking about this square, this is very important for the Russians because according to reports we got, the Russians managed to encircle and to cut and cauldron the Ukrainians who are currently located to the south of the Kliban-Buksky pocket. When talking about the Kliban-Buksky pockets, as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukrainian defense in the southwestern part and to establish complete control over the southern part of the settlement of Alexandra Kalinova. We came to this based on this video that was published by the Ukrainians. You know that and this is a very important video because it's not like a video where we can see Ukrainian drone that was flying above positions of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group and how Ukrainian drones were destroying Russian forces. This is not the kind of video where we might see Russian motorcycles moving in the direction of another position with the purpose to break through the Ukrainian defense. This is the video where we can see Russian convoys, armored vehicles, armored rush, total tanks, protected tanks with additional protection entering the southern part of Alexandra Kalinova and landing infantry. Just in this video we could see at least 2 vehicles that enter the southern and the central part of Alexandra Kalinova and how the Russians managed to land infantry. So this is exactly the moment when the Russians land.
Franchement, quand vous voyez ça là, les gens comment ils bougent sous les bombes. Je me souviens encore de la bêtise de Pascal Pro. Oui, il y a des juifs israéliens, il y a des juifs français, ils ont dit qu'ils sont mieux en Israël sous les bombes qu'à Paris dans la sécurité. Quand tu vois ça là, tu dis, quelqu'un peut dire ça, et surtout toi, qui est à la télé, qui est censé faire preuve de retenue. Quelqu'un te raconte ça et tu viens aussi à la télé, tu dis, c'est vrai que voilà, il y a des Israéliens qui me disent que ils sont plus en sécurité sous les bombes en Israël que à Paris dans l'insécurité de Saint-Denis ou de Sarcelles. C'est pour ça que j'ai dit, ce monsieur, c'est une grosse baltringue, une arnaque monumentale qui raconte que des conneries. Vivre sous ça et comparer ça à passer ta vie tranquillement en marchant à Saint-Denis, comme si à Saint-Denis, les gens, ils sont là. Oui, on les cherche, n'importe quoi.
Infantry exactly in the central part. So according to this video, one of the episodes, the most important episode, was located exactly in this point, and based on this video we colored the entire territory, so to the south of Alexandra Kalinova. And now from this perspective we see that the Russians are just at 700 meters from the main road, supply and support road N20, that goes further in the eastern direction along 0524 road. So now we understand that most likely this road was cut by the Russians physically, or at least the Russians established very tough control with this territory with FPV drones and with artillery and mortar strikes. So we believe that Ukrainians lost any possibilities to use this N20 road for supply and support of their contingent on the territory of Katerinovka, Kliban, Byk, Sherbinovka, Novospaske. So we're talking about this pocket, and as we discussed during the previous let's say part of this episode, the Ukrainians are about to lose their supply and support lines that goes from Ivanopolia, Plishivka in the southern direction. So both lines are already under complete Russian fire control. We believe that during the next days we're going to see more and more losses from the Ukrainian side. Now the Ukrainians have just two options: either to begin evacuation from this area, or the Ukrainians need to carry out counterattacks in the area of Alexandra Kalinova with the purpose to restore control over this territory and restore control over supply lines and to maintain the corridor for evacuation. And Ukrainians can counterattack the Russians in the northwestern part of the city of Terezk, also with the same purposes, to maintain corridor and to create a space for Ukrainians in this pocket for evacuation. Currently it's very difficult to say how many Ukrainian soldiers are there, but obviously we're talking about several hundreds, probably even about several thousands. If the Russians are able to cut them in cauldron, this is going to be huge loss for Ukrainians and huge loss from strategical perspective.
Moi, je suis un soldat ukrainien, je suis là. Franchement, je me rends. Je me rends. Pourquoi je vais aller mourir pour des gens incompétents comme ça, là, des gens comme Zelensky? Dans une situation comme ça, je lève le drapeau blanc.
Now let's move further. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published a very interesting video. This video was published by the Russian sources affiliated with the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. And in this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions and temporary deployment points in the area of the city of Zaporozhye and in the area of the village of Volodymyrovka. As a result of these attacks, several deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine were destroyed. Ukrainians suffered huge losses, according to the Russians. As for now, we haven't received numbers or let's say videos that can confirm losses, but obviously we see that the Russians control the line of combat contact and deep rear. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. According to information we have, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the units of the Group of Forces Center managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Novonikolayevka. We're talking about this village, which is located on the border with Dnipropetrovsk region. Furthermore, according to several mappers, the Russians moved further in the direction of the settlement of Muravka, and several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians by the end of the 19th of June of 2025 managed to secure the village of Muravka on 50%. So when talking about everything we got during the previous day, the Russian possible positions is already goes along this red line, which means that the Russians are about to finish the battle for this territory and to enter the Dnipropetrovsk region in this region area as well. Furthermore, this is not the only let's say roads of attack of the Russian forces of the Group of Forces Center. Today, according to several pro-Russian resources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the area of the village by the name of Udachne. Currently, the Russians resumed their offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory and then most likely to move further. You know that this is very interesting. These Russian offensive in this area are very interesting, not just because the Russians resumed their attacks in this direction, but probably the main interest and the most interesting information about this offensive we got yesterday, and this information was published by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. And according to information we have, the Chief of the Russian Armed Forces General Staff, First Deputy Defense Minister General of the Army Valery Gerasimov, inspected the formations and units of the Combined Arms Army as a part of the central group of forces. So yesterday Gerasimov visited exactly this area, and most likely yesterday, maybe not yesterday, maybe those days, the yesterday, day before yesterday, he made the final, he gave the final instructions to the commanders of this group of forces with the purpose to begin their offensive or resume their offensive exactly in this area on the southwestern and the western flank of the city of Pokrovsk, with the purpose to get as deep as possible on the territory of this the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, probably even with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Novopavlovka from the north and the northwest, and probably to establish complete control over the settlement of Mizhova. And after the Russians published this piece of news, the Russians began offensive, as you can see according to different sources.
Yeah.
At the same
En tout cas, ça s'annonce pas bon pour l'Ukraine. Et vous voyez bien que Pokrovsk, c'est ce que les Occidentaux ou les gens sur les plateaux télé, à chaque fois, leur réponse se retourne contre eux. Ils étaient là, vous voyez que les Russes n'avancent pas, vous voyez qu'ils sont au ralenti, regardez à Pokrovsk, la situation s'est gelée, oui. Mais quand tu vois l'évolution de la carte, on aurait dit que les Russes ont compris que voilà, les Ukrainiens font des choses pour que les Occidentaux aient de quoi diffuser des choses à la télé, mais concrètement, en faisant ça, ils se laissent ou ils créent des zones de faiblesse qui profitent aux Russes. Parce que depuis, nous avons presque plus rien comme nouveaux signaux comme quoi les Russes veulent rentrer à Pokrovsk. Mais bientôt, Pokrovsk va se retrouver dans une poche, qu'on le veuille ou pas, parce qu'on le voit ici. On le voit ici, regardez, Pokrovsk c'est là. Ils sont déjà en face. Derrière, la dernière fois, on avait vu qu'ils étaient en train d'avancer. Là, on leur dit d'aller là. Vous pensez qu'une fois qu'ils vont rentrer et qu'ils seront sur le dos de Pokrovsk, c'est qui va souffrir directement et qui voudra quitter Pokrovsk même sans se battre? N'est-ce pas l'armée ukrainienne?
Russians published this piece of news, the Russians began offensive, as you can see according to different sources. At the same time, the Russians continued their offensive operation in the direction of this pocket. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. We got geolocation and video that can confirm this. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units in this area, and this video confirms Russian control over these fields along the anti-tank ditches. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians continue attempts to evacuate their soldiers from this pocket using vehicles, light vehicles, but the Russians have hundreds of drones in this area, and as soon as the Russians discovered the movements of Ukrainians in this area, they attacked this vehicle with FPV drone, as you can see. As a result of this attack, this vehicle was damaged and destroyed. Furthermore, the Ukrainians...
Non, après, je ne suis pas sûr qu'ils aient forcément touché la cible, parce qu'on voit que l'image disparaît avant qu'ils se rapprochent trop de la cible. Mais vous voyez le scénario. C'est exactement après ce qui va se passer à Pokrovsk. Une fois que les Russes seront dans leur dos, ils vont être obligés de sortir de là sous les attaques des drones russes. Comme on voit ici. Et donc c'est là qu'on a le plus de gens qui tombent. Et on ne peut plus nous inventer genre, oui, mais les Russes, ils envoient leurs soldats. Non. On voit bien que les Russes, avant d'arriver, l'artillerie tombe, les drones viennent et après ils avancent. Et une fois qu'ils ont contourné, la zone devient difficile puisqu'ils resserrent les pinces et tout ce qui doit sortir de là n'est pas principalement attaqué par les soldats russes, mais est attaqué par l'artillerie et les drones. Donc nous voyons que les bêtises ou les propagandes de l'Occident, ça ne marche plus. Là, au bout de 3 ans, ça devient concret. Et peut-être aussi, c'est dû au fait que voilà, l'Ukraine a, comme on l'avait vu dans les semaines précédentes, est en manque d'effectifs, d'armes, d'argent. Et ça commence à faire compliqué, puisque de toute manière, l'argent, c'est pour payer les dettes. Et les Européens ne produisent toujours pas plus. Et les États-Unis produisent toujours pas plus. Et surtout, les États-Unis distribuent encore plus à Israël.
During the previous nights, sent several groups of forces with the purpose to stabilize the situation along the flanks, with the purpose not to allow the Russians to cut this pocket completely. Now the Ukrainians are focused on maintaining this area with the purpose to allow their units to evacuate themselves. And in this video we can see how another group of Ukrainians came to edge position with the purpose to stabilize the situation along the border between Dnipro and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, while the Russians discovered these vehicles and destroyed them immediately. So as you can see, the situation in this area remains tense. At the same time, the Russian forces continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Zaporozhye, Zirka and Yalta. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory. Currently, there are very heavy clashes. According to information we have, the Russians answered the village of Zaporozhye several days ago from the eastern part, and now we see that Ukrainians show fierce resistance. The Ukrainians are not planning to surrender, and most likely they are going to fight for this territory for as long as possible. But maybe the main problem for the Ukrainians is that they don't have possibilities to evacuate themselves because they're completely surrounded by the rivers. And most likely there are anti-retreat forces behind these rivers that will hold their lines as far as long as possible, with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to abandon their positions. So maybe these Ukrainians don't have any other option but to fight for this territory for as long as possible, while the Russians are pushing and pushing and pushing. So as we can see,
j'espère que c'est pas le cas, parce que le monsieur dit que voilà, les Ukrainiens dans cette zone-là sont en train de se battre alors que ça semble désespéré. Et peut-être qu'ils se battent parce qu'ils n'ont pas de manœuvre de retraite, parce qu'il y a des unités ukrainiennes derrière qui les attendent au cas où ils décideraient de se retirer du combat. Et donc, ils n'ont plus de manœuvre de retraite, donc ils sont obligés de défendre leur vie coûte que coûte. Moi, je serais les Russes, je leur proposerais qu'ils se rendent tranquillement et puis qu'on va rien leur faire, parce que les gens qui défendent leur vie sont les plus dangereux. C'est une fois que tu sais que voilà, c'est ça ou la mort, surtout si on te laisse que la mort, autant mieux partir avec le maximum de dégâts. Donc, à voir. Et c'est ainsi que nous avons fini cette revue de Military Summary qui a été long, surprenant. Et donc c'était très intéressant, très informatif. Et bon, on va passer à l'actualité et aux différents trucs qu'on a parlé, qu'on voyait, la pression que la Chine essaye d'exercer sur ce conflit.